Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. It's now 10 o'clock, so we're going to get started. So appreciate you all being here this morning. So our intention over the next half hour to 40 minutes is to go through some of the dramatic shifts that we're seeing in the HR world. And so a couple of things to note that this webinar is being recorded right now. So we do have everyone on mute. And we have a couple of ways that you can ask questions or raise your hand. So certainly there is the chat function. And chat function, we ask that you use if you have any questions about specific material that you're hearing today. But I think a great feature that we opened up, and I'm going to share with you in a moment or two, is our Ask Live program, where you can ask any questions and we're going to do all the research for you on that question and get back to you with a thoroughly developed answer, research, sources, etc. And I'm going to share that with you in a moment. So again, I thank you for being here. And we're going to jump in. And again, the intention is over the next 30 to 35 minutes to go through the presentation and then get to your questions and answers. So with that, we have a couple of people coming in. So I'm just going to filibuster for a moment or two. And just give me a minute and we'll come right back. So welcome to our webinar today. Before we dive in, let me introduce myself. My name is Rick Marr. I am the CEO, visionary, and owner of Turning Point Human Capital Management. Our company assists businesses with their HR and technology needs. We have experts on staff that are available to run your entire HR department, or just be a resource for immediate and important questions you may have, like some of the things we're going to be discussing today. We are extremely well versed in all things HR, especially when it comes to what's happening right now, such as vaccine mandates, OSHA, employees leaving, i.e. the Great Resignation. The list goes on, and we'll talk about these things in detail today. Obviously, all of these things that are going on right now, it creates a fluid situation for HR and business leaders. So we are monitoring all of these moving parts, these breaking news stories in real time. And it may come as no surprise that those things are shifting the business world between the economy, the pandemic. As business leaders, many of us are scared and scrambling not only to adjust our sales and business models, but also from an HR perspective, thinking about employee operations. An HR issue or an HR problem could be perhaps one of the most costliest mistakes to happen to any company if not managed properly. So that is the intention of this session, is to go through some of those things and highlight them and give you access to a resource, particularly for the next couple of hours, who can answer any questions that you may have. So as I mentioned earlier, we are going to open up our Ask Live service. And the way that you do that, here's some instructions on the screen. You go to www.turningpointhcm.com. You'll see the Ask Live button on the homepage, which is right here. It's underneath this computer screen. And a form fill will pop up. And you can ask any question that you want, and we're going to do some research for you. So I do have a question. And so Kara, who's working with me on this program, has listed that information in the chat button. So you can go on there and click the link. However, I will also show you where that is right here. So this is our homepage. This is our website. It's turningpointhcm.com. Click Ask Live Now. And this chat box opens up here, and you can type any question that you want in there. So it's a really nice little feature. So we're going to keep this open to anyone who's on this session for the remainder of the day to ask any sort of questions that you may have. So appreciate that. Okay, so let's go back to here. Okay, so that's how we do that. So, and you will also receive a response. So here's a quick sample of the response you can expect to receive back via email. Again, Live is available for the rest of the day for any questions you may have, and this is complimentary that we're doing for you. So you just you'll receive a response with, here's the question that you asked, and here is the detailed answer and some useful links. So let's start talking about what's going on with OSHA and how it affects you directly, and also all of the other mandates that are coming about. So, for instance, the other day, New York City mayor has implemented a mandate. Oregon has implemented a mandate. There are federal contractors mandates going on. So there's all kinds of mandates. So for purposes of this discussion, I'm going to use OSHA as the overarching umbrella for all of these different mandates because they're all in the same, some sort of flux as we go through there. Okay, so the OSHA temporary standard, emergency temporary standard. So what is it? So OSHA, right, Occupational Self-Health Administration, has what they call an emergency temporary standard, or ETS. So this really serves as the guideline for all of these other mandates that are coming about, and the challenges that they face and the challenges that they'll present for business leaders. So on November 4th, OSHA issued an unpublished version of its long-awaited emergency temporary standard, for the rest of the session identified as the ETS, as to COVID vaccination or testing requirements covering most employers, private employers with 100 employees or less. The ETS was published and it took effect on November 5th. And then companies, it'll go into effect 30 days later, December 5th, which is a timeline that just passed. So this gave employers 30 days to comply with all the non-testing requirements of the ETS, and 60 days, or until January 4th, to comply with testing requirements for employees who have not received all the doses for the primary vaccination. So breaking news again today, OSHA and departments of health are looking at now a third shot to define someone who's fully vaccinated as a third shot. So that is not yet addressed in what is happening in the OSHA ETS or any of these other mandates that are coming out. Is it 2 shots, or the Johnson & Johnson 1 shot, or is it booster shots included? So the OSHA Act also calls for this emergency temporary standard to be made permanent within 6 months. So although there are some court actions going on, the goal, or the big push, is to move this to be a permanent standard for all employees and all businesses with 100 employees or less. Now, when you combine some of the other mandates like New York City and potentially Oregon, and healthcare workers, et cetera, that number of 100 employees could go down to less than 100 employees if, depending on the business that you're in. So what are the employer's responsibilities? So for purposes of the ETS and these other mandates, a covered employee is one with 100 or more employees. Again, could be less depending on the business you're in and depending on the mandates that are continually coming out every day. At any time during the effective period of the ETS, which we are in, this means that an employer who meets the minimum threshold as of the effective date of 100 employees will be subjected to this mandate. Additionally, those that reach the mandate during the period, so maybe you had 98 employees and then you have 101, they now will fall under the mandate effective of crossing that 100-person threshold. Additionally, if you've crossed that 100-person threshold and then bounce back down, you will also be required to follow this mandate. So as you can tell, there's a lot of things that are going on with this. And there are some employees that are excluded. So the ETS specifies that the requirements apply only to employees who visit an employer's indoor location where other people are present. So employees who work exclusively at home, outdoors, or at a site where the employee is the only person present are not required to comply with the employer's with the requirement. However, should such an employee later be required to go visit an office or be in a place where there are clients, et cetera, they will fall under the mandate. So there are reasonable accommodations to this policy. You see them on the right-hand side of your screen. The ETS requires employers to provide reasonable accommodations and exceptions for employees for whom the vaccine is medically contraindicated, for whom medical necessity requires a delay in vaccination, or those who are entitled to a reasonable accommodation due to a disability or sincerely held religious beliefs and practices. So I don't know how someone is determining what the level of sincerity is, but I guess we'll get there and we'll understand in future webinars as the ETS becomes more clear. As to the vaccination requirements, the employer is required to provide an employee with time to obtain and recover from the vaccination. Specifically, the employer must provide up to 4 hours of paid time, inclusive of travel time, at the employee's regular pay rate to obtain the vaccine. And the employer must also provide reasonable paid time off to recover from any side effects of each dose of the vaccine. So if they have 2 or 3 doses, each one of them is a separate entity. There's also proof of vaccination and record keeping requirements for each employer. So the employer must obtain valid records for all employees' vaccinations by obtaining one of the following, right? A record of immunization from a healthcare provider or pharmacy, a copy, you don't see slides changing. Is anyone, I just got someone doesn't see the slides changing. Does anyone see the slides changing? Wanda raised hand. Let's see here. Kara, do you see the slides changing? Yep, we are on employer responsibility. Yep, that's where we are. So we should be on employer responsibility slide. So the proof of vaccination and record keeping requirements, the employer must obtain valid records for all employees from the pharmacy, the doctor, a vaccination card, a copy of medical records. So I'm just okay, I'm reading. Okay, it's not changing. So Wanda, you can see the changing here. So I'm on this employer responsibility slide. Okay. So let me see. If an employee is unable to produce acceptable proof of vaccination, okay, Wanda, we got you there. Okay, if an employer is unable to produce an acceptable proof of vaccination, they may provide a signed, dated employee statement that A, attests to their vaccination status, B, attests that the employee has lost or is otherwise unable to produce proof of vaccination, and includes the following language: I declare or certify or verify that this statement about my vaccination is true and accurate. And I understand that knowingly providing false information regarding my vaccination status on this form may subject me to criminal penalties. The ETS specifically requires employees to obtain and maintain these records as well, okay? There are testing requirements. So for employees that allow a testing option, the employer must ensure that unvaccinated employees who report to work at least once every 7 days are either A, tested for COVID-19 at least once every 7 days, and B, provide documentation that the most recent COVID-19 test result no later than the 7th day following the date. So basically every week they need to get tested. Sorry, I'm getting, let me turn that off. I'm getting spam calls as we speak, okay? And face covering requirements. Employees who are not fully vaccinated are required to wear face coverings while in the workplace, and that meet the standards provided in ETS, okay? So let's go next. So where are we in this timeline so far, right? Because I think this timeline is very important because things are changing literally every single day. There are court actions, and ultimately we believe that all of these things will end up in the Supreme Court in some sort of emergency hearing before they're implemented. But let's kind of give a timeline for where this is. So the ETS was announced on the 4th. On the 6th of November, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals put a stay on that order, and there were many lawsuits from different districts. On the 16th, It was determined by what's called a ping pong lottery, because multiple districts of courts had lawsuits, injunctions against this order. And on the 16th, it was determined that the Sixth Court of Appeals, Circuit Court of Appeals, is going to consolidate all the actions against these mandates, and they are going to have a hearing, a 16-judge panel hearing, where they're going to determine if these things are, constitutional, legal, etc. Ultimately, it is the okay. Can you hear me now? Someone just give a thumbs up or something. Yes. Okay, great. So it is determined that this is going to end up in the Supreme Court at some point in the next few weeks to a month or so. So then the U.S. on November 11th, the 18th rather, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has advised its members to proceed with planning for the ETS until the courts definitively either shut it down or approve that it can go forward. So we are suggesting to everyone to make plan in the middle. It's going to make it very difficult. Additionally, since this order was announced, we've all heard that on November 26th, the Omicron variant was announced to the world, and that cases are now found throughout the country, and it's potentially spreading. So that may play into this. We're not just sure. So on December 2nd, in response to that, the Biden administration asked employers to voluntarily enact the ETS, the emergency temporary standard that OSHA has put together. So we're not sure where that is. Some companies may be doing that. We're not aware of any yet, but that is certainly something that is being asked of businesses. Also on December 2nd, the Biden administration announced that health insurers must cover the cost of at-home testing kits. So that is according to a CNBC article, that at-home testing kits will now be covered by private insurers. Now, we haven't gotten any word from private insurers as to how they're doing this. We're assuming this means you can walk into a local pharmacy or store, wherever they sell these at-home kits, buy a supply of kits for yourself, and then use those kits and take those. So that's kind of where we are, and what we're expecting is that this will, as I mentioned earlier, will end up in the Supreme Court. Now, with the ETS, there are some significant fines that we want to be aware of, right? So these fines and fees would be enforced by OSHA. And so they're listed out here. It's $10,000 and up to 6 months imprisonment for any individual that knowingly presents falsified documents. So, there are stories going around that people are getting falsified ID cards or vaccination cards, presenting them. Now that could lead to up to $10,000 and up to 6 months in jail for that person. For the employer, there is a up to a $14,000 per violation for those employers that have multiple violations of this COVID ETS policy. And if there's another additional of up to $70,000 per company for serious violations, I guess those would be considered those that are kind of ignoring the rules that are there, and up to $700,000 per business for willful or repeated violations. So with that said, they're putting some teeth around this. And if it goes to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court deems that this could be enacted, then businesses need to be prepared to react. HR departments need to be prepared to react. And so what are businesses doing, being proactive versus reactive? So the first thing is record keeping. This will be a big lift for employers to keep track of who is vaccinated, when they are vaccinated, when they will track booster shot requirements. So think about all this. When an employee is vaccinated one day, on the next day, they may fall out of compliance because of their booster status. So how does an HR department handle this, right? I mean, I think these are the things we need to be thinking about. Employers are getting their recruiting strategies in place. So although we will talk about the great exodus or the great resignation in a subsequent slide, on January 4th or some certain date in early 2022, some companies may lose 5 to 20% of their workforce. So how does a business handle that if, a handful of their people or a significant portion of their people now have to be terminated? We're hearing stories about this in the news almost every day. There was a hospital in Buffalo yesterday that let go 100 healthcare workers because they were not vaccinated. We're hearing those kinds of stories all across the country. So how does a business plan for that? And how do they be proactive and ready to react should they have to terminate, 5 or 10 or 15 or 20% of their employees? The next thing that they're doing is they're updating their policies and procedures. So specifically, their employee handbooks need to be up to date for this and the dozens of other rules and regulations that went into effect in 2021 from federal and state entities. As a HR business, we've been dealing with, we've literally updated 300 handbooks this year to keep up with the more than 68 federal laws that have come out that should be updated in your handbook. So having a good handbook and a process to keep it up to date is uber important, and many businesses are doing this literally every day. The next is HIPAA training, right? As you can imagine, all of this stuff is creating a lot of discussion around health-related issues. So much like diversity or sexual harassment training, a sound proactive strategy is to have HIPAA training. Now, if we combine, think what I said earlier, that President Biden has mandated that health insurers must pay for home testing kits. So now this means employees are coming in every day or once a week with a result to a test. Who's seeing that information? Who's talking about it? Who's accepting it? Where is it being stored? All of these things could be potential HIPAA issues. So you want to start to think about that, right? The next thing that they're doing, and I encourage you to try our Ask Live that we talked about earlier. The next thing is having a resource that these business leaders and HR people can ask questions to about these matters, right? There's enough in HR to keep up with every day in normal circumstances. Now with these mandates and things that are coming out fast and furious, it's more important than ever to have a great resource that you can ask someone. So we used our Ask Live service today to give you a sample of what that could be like for your business. But we really encourage that someone have a point person, subject matter expert, give it any kind of industry term that you want, but someone who truly is keeping up with what's going on here and how someone you can call and get up-to-date answers, because it's literally changing every day. So for today's purposes, we'll answer any questions, we'll do the research, we'll give you the citations and all that stuff. So please just use that link and ask any questions that you may have today. Since we're doing this for free, we ask that put the questions. I don't. Be hard for us to answer 20 questions. 1 or 2 questions would be fine. So what do we see on the horizon? And in light of what was discussed earlier, the Omicron variant and the legal proceedings, and where this thing is going to end up in the Supreme Court with an emergency review. So we need to react to whatever the law is. So I see a question from Manuel, so I will certainly answer that when we get to the end in the next few moments. Okay, so what does this mean for your business, right? So we talked a little bit about the Great Exodus. The term the Great Exodus has been thrown around a lot lately, or the Great Resignation, and for good reason. Companies who do not want to enforce a vaccine mandate will likely have to terminate their employees. right? Depending on the mandates that are required. And companies who will enforce the mandate will have employees that are going to leave on their own accord. So what is going to happen if your most important employees leave? Hiring or recruiting is going to become first and foremost. So whether you're terminating or hiring, are you compliantly ready to have these difficult conversations? Are you prepared to lose your best employees? Do you have an action plan in place to replace a mass amount of employees? And mass amount is really up to what your business is. If you have a 30-person business or 75 or 110 person business and 10 or 15 people leave, is that a mass leaving, and how do you deal with that? What does your budget look like? Not only for hiring, but if weekly testing is an option. So this can become extremely costly. Hiring a new employee, as we all know, the figures can range somewhere between 1.25 and 1.5 times their annual salary. So if you all of a sudden have to replace 10 or 15 or 20 people, what does that do to your budget? So these conversations can be extremely difficult, and you may not have an HR team at hand to have them for you. To be prepared, regardless if you're the HR director, the CEO, the COO, or any part of the management team, it's best to have the following steps in place. One, be sure all of your policies that apply to your company are up to date and understood. Two, make sure your handbook is up to date. Three, have written policies and documentation for all communications surrounding these mandates. Four, have an expert on hand to answer any questions or handle any of the issues that arise from these mandates. And if you need to terminate anyone in the Great Resignation or the Great Exodus, please ensure that you have a hiring plan in place. So the Great Exodus, and this is kind of my pet issue here, the Great Exodus may have another dark side, that companies may move towards more automation. So according to this CNBC article on November 19th, as the difficulty in finding workers, dealing with mandates, forced resignations, voluntary resignations, business leaders may be turning to more automation in their workplace so that they don't have to deal with those things, right? So with this as a backdrop, we expect continued growth in automation of roles, both to take the place of workers companies cannot find if they can't find workers, and to offset the rising wage pressures and dealing with these mandates. So this is an important trend that we're watching as HR, as it will shape the labor markets over the long term. And given that automation, once installed, is simply never reversed. So as an example of this, I'm going to show you two 30-second videos. This first one is Flippy the hamburger. So think about, I'm just going to show you 30 seconds of this. Think about what is an entry-level job for most businesses is now almost becoming robotic, right? So Cali Burger in California is actually installing these things, and it's a combination of worker and robot. So you can imagine how this could affect business and what is the next step of this, right? So automation, I'll just show you 30 seconds of that. Automation in that sense of let's call it an entry-level job, a service sector job, is coming about because of these things that we're seeing in the workplace, dealing with rising wage costs, cannot find workers, and also the the Great Resignation or the mandates, et cetera. And I see we have a question, so I'll get to that in a moment. Okay, so this next one is from Boston Dynamics, and this one could be seen as scary. You may have seen this, but this is another, just again, take forward what the possibilities of something like this are in the workplace. So I'll just show you a few seconds of this. So now we're in a construction site, right? And here it is, it's bringing tools, it's bringing lights, it's programmable. I have cameras, it could do lots of different things. So everyone gets the picture there, I'm assuming, right? So I think that with this automation, we're seeing a tremendous potential shift in the business world and in the HR component of how we staff our businesses, how we think about our employees, and what's going on. So next steps and now what? So being prepared for what lies ahead is the best thing we can do now. Implementing next steps will be largely dependent upon the size of your organization and how you operate. Some steps to take, regardless of the size of your business or the industry in, and I mentioned them earlier, have a resource. Have someone who understands and can update you with accurate information on new policies, mandates, et cetera. Have a plan / policy is required by OSHA, right? So understand that although right now it's in the courts, there's a very good chance that it could become active. Plan for this to not be temporary, right? Whether it's mandates or automation or great resignation, these are things that are systemic in our economy right now and in our workforce. And as HR leaders, we have to understand. Plan for boosters, right? So someone may have gotten the vaccine, at the very beginning in April or March. Are those people now out of compliance if they don't have a booster? So plan for boosters and continual updates on people's vaccination status. Plan for the emergency temporary standard to spread to companies under 100 employees, right? And then start talking about automation, right? So if it's hard to find employees, sales processes are automated, how we purchase products has become automated, how we service companies and customers is becoming automated. So think about how that may affect your business going forward. So it sounded like there's a lot of information, and it is. And Ask Liv will be up on our website for the next couple of hours for you to revisit. We will be doing another updated version of this webinar in early January. So around the 3rd or the 4th, when the mandate is about to come out. So we're going to finalize that, and we're going to be watching the news and seeing what happens there. And in the meantime, our service Ask Liv is quick. It's a reliable resource to have your questions answered with advice on next steps as time goes on. So I hope you take advantage of Liv being live today to have your questions answered. She'll be there for the rest of the afternoon. So please feel free. Again, please ask the questions. You can go to our website and ask any questions of Liv that you may have. And within the next 24 to 48 hours, we will get you that research back. So I want to thank you for joining us today. I'm going to answer questions now, but we will be continuing to keep you updated on new mandates as they come through. And so let me go through here. I have some Q&A here. Let me just scroll up here and see. I have Manuel. So HIPAA is already at risk regarding vaccination disclosure, and more with regard to why not vaccinated. So I'm not necessarily sure of what the question is, but I think the point is well taken that HIPAA is an important thing, right? And certainly we expect from just natural HR that if there's not good HIPAA controls and HIPAA training in a company, people are going to be talking about other people's health, results, vaccination status, and it could bleed into other issues. So we want to make sure that we're not creating this free-for-all of everyone walking around the water cooler or doing Zooms talking about everyone's health status, what did their last test say, et cetera. And also, what else is wrong? Oh, they sneezed. Do they have it? Do they have something else? So we want to be very cognizant of HIPAA and have HIPAA training and make sure that we're not creating an issue by trying to comply with this mandate. So the next question is, how will companies with 100+ employees spread over multiple states follow if some states are not enforcing, as in Florida? Do the employees in Florida still get counted as 100? That's a great question. And our research of that so far is that part of the OSHA emergency temporary standard is a national standard which would supersede any states. So much like many other laws in the state, let's use, I'll just make up one off the fly here, like speed limits. If the federal speed limit is 55 miles an hour, a state can do 50 miles an hour if they choose, because it's lesser than the federal mandate, but they can't arbitrarily raise it to 60 miles an hour, right? So as we understand it, as it stands today, the OSHA temporary standard is a blanket that sits over all of the states and supersedes anyone who wants to do less, or any state that wants to do less. And the entity itself is what's more important, that it has 100 employees. So regardless if 10 are in this state and 20 are in that state, if the entity itself has over 100 employees, they will be subject to the mandate. The next question comes from Mark. So what do you think will happen long-term with OSHA and the mandates? So thank you, Mark. This is purely my opinion. I believe that these are not going away. And this is the first shot across the bow for business owners that federal and state and city entities are pushing for these sorts of mandates. And I think that what we see in in New York City and in Oregon, who wants to mandate masks everywhere inside, regardless of status, I think that we'll start to see more local governments implementing their own mandates. So I don't believe that this is going away. I think the form of it may change, who's managing it may change, but I don't think it's going away. More importantly, I do think it's going to trickle down to the smallest of employers. So it doesn't matter what size you are, because I think their goal is to have everyone vaccinated, tested, or wearing a mask. So I don't believe this is going away anytime soon, but I do believe there'll be changes to what we see today. So that's why it's important to have a great resource and someone who's a subject matter expert on this advising you and your team. So thank you, Mark. The next question is, Paula, thank you. What are our current options for monitoring this? This seems to be changing almost weekly. And Paula, it's changing nearly daily, it seems. So what I would say is there are entities out there that have built out tracking resources to track all of these documents, to get HIPAA waivers, to do all of the things that need to go into this, what's going to become an administrative burden for HR departments. We have built one, so we do that, but there are other organizations that do that as well. So we, in many instances, have clients that are doing weekly testing now for their non-vaccinated employees. They are monitoring the status of when boosters are due. They are, monitoring symptoms every day, all that sort of stuff. So there are resources out there, but I would say that many HR departments are lean, right? Are lean to begin with. This is going to add a layer of complexity that is going to fall on the business and the HR departments. So that's an important thing to remember. So with that said, let me just double check. Are there any other questions? I don't think so. So I want to thank you for being here. I please encourage you to use Ask Liv. If you have any questions, we'll do the research. We'll get back to you. We're giving it away for free today, so no obligations whatsoever, other than to make sure that everyone has as much up-to-date message information as they can. So thank you for being here. As this is recorded, this will be up on our website and social media if you'd like to revisit in the future. Thank you and have a great day.